This is the final section of the presentation where I'm going to discuss physical houses and construction methods. So you may have noted that I have spoken for quite some time about housing and I haven't actually mentioned houses themselves. So throughout my research, it almost seemed that the physical construction of houses was the easy bit of actually looking at the housing problem as a whole. Technology and globalisation have contributed hugely towards innovation in the housing sector, and over the next few decades I would foresee the end of bricks and mortar. Instead, we now have lower cost, high efficiency options which allow us to be more specific and flexible without compromising quality. We're able to digitise many aspects of the long and unnecessarily complex journey of creating a home, and we're able to be more ambitious with our homes than ever. Physical housing also plays a vital role in facilitating the financial and social models that I've discussed in the previous two sections of the presentation. As Winston Churchill observed, our buildings really do shape us. They mediate our interactions with society and with each other. To have a home that is appropriate for your needs is a fundamental ingredient of any successful integration to society, and as well as our physical and mental health. We're continuously told that the housing crisis is due to lack of supply and that increasing the supply will end the crisis. Currently, there are 20,629 empty, privately owned homes in Northern Ireland. The commodification of both housing and land has led to the construction of multiple barriers around housing, making it harder than ever for someone who is not wealthy to acquire a physical house, whether it be through renting, buying, or building one of their own. However, those who have wealth are able to firstly acquire a house, and then with acquiring one house they're inevitably then able to acquire multiple houses, whilst, as I say, another person struggles to meet that first barrier in itself. Another huge part of this issue is the commodification of land in conjunction with the commodification of housing. As you can see, we have enough land available to totally eradicate our housing waiting lists, yet this land is yet another tradable commodity that is being repurposed as profit-making material rather than being used to meet demand. We need only to look at the social housing scandals across the UK, where premium land that was originally housing social tenants is now being sold off to allow for luxury accommodation. Land is also controlled by strict laws and procedures which make it only really accessible to people who can understand those regulations and procedures. I would like to break down my observations and reflections in this section into three key pillars that I feel encompass my thoughts on the physical side of things. The first of these is buildings and how new builds can provide solutions that should reduce housing stress. The second of these is technology and how it can act as actually an agent of social change. And the third of these is policy and how policy can have an influence on our housing system as a whole. Firstly, let's look at buildings. Irrespective of social divides, we have a huge disparity here in Northern Ireland between the type of housing we need and the type of housing that we have. Globally, we have seen housing trends shift towards smaller households, with many individuals seeking housing due to work opportunities in cities away from family and friends. The average household size in the UK is now 2.3 people, whereas in 1961 it was 3.1 people. We're seeing the number of people living alone rising on a yearly basis. Of the 23,694 people in Northern Ireland who are in housing stress, 33% of them are single males. We have a severe shortage of individual dwellings here, which leads to enforced shared housing. This is not desirable for anyone and has a higher risk of failing. Our first task really should be looking at this provision of single dwellings through embracing modular homes. I saw many different types of modular homes while I was on my travels, such as this one here, provided by Mini House Finland. So young architect Maria decided to create a quick-acting, sustainable solution to housing problems in Helsinki. Helsinki has 4 million square metres of unused space, a lot of which exists around old railway tracks and docklands, some of which has been derelict for over 20 years. Maria's small mini houses can fit 1 or 2 people and can be assembled in a matter of days. They have a lifespan of decades and are produced robustly in a factory for a relatively cheap retail price of just €80,000. Additionally, these houses are portable, so they can be moved if the land they're sitting on becomes usable again. Furthermore, Maria's mini houses are a viable solution to others who are not just seeking their first home. Since setting up her company 2 years ago, she was actually inundated by requests from elderly people who wished to downsize and then rent out their family home to others. This modular solution is very similar to the one that we are working on within the Holding Project. The Holding Project is a social enterprise which I established here in Belfast to help us look at how to provide sustainable, affordable housing, primarily for young people, but as time has gone on, we're beginning to look at other demographics. I work with two co-founders, Sean Cullen and Chris Miller, and we're currently developing a prototype which looks set to create something which uses local factories and materials for a price of less than £40,000. So we're looking specifically at how our modular houses could be placed onto unused or underused land within the city, and have specifically designed the modular homes to fit onto the footprint of a traditional terraced house here in Belfast, so that if those houses are demolished, our houses could be put in place very, very easily. Similarly to mini house, these homes can be assembled within days, and they're made with structurally insulated panels which are cut to size in a local factory. We're looking specifically at young people with our approach, but there's no reason why our homes can't serve multiple communities, such as in a similar way to Mini House Finland. I would call on local housing authorities to start taking modular homes very seriously and to provide their support for ventures such as ours. Modular isn't the only solution that we could be looking at. We should also be looking at underused spaces that could be used to create new housing. In Boston, they were looking at public spaces such as libraries, schools and even fire stations that were only being used for one portion of the day, to see if they could incorporate housing in some way so that that particular site was being put into use 24 hours a day. We have a great example here with the Skenos Centre, where living spaces have been incorporated into both learning spaces and social spaces, as well as eating and communal spaces. That particular spot is being used 24/7. This is a great example of a project, and I would propose that more resources are given to us to look at how we can really make the most of our city spaces in the urban landscape. Technology is also part of driving real change in the housing industry, and I saw some great examples at how technology could also be an agent of social change while I was in America. In the right hands, technology has the ability to completely disrupt an industry such as housing by simply using the power of data. This is of particular use to an individual who may be dreaming of eventually owning their own house. Currently, the path towards building your own house is a really complicated process. From advice seeking to consulting, permission seeking, researching, it is very, very time consuming. It is no coincidence that the vast majority of those who pursue this path are middle class high earners with large amounts of capital behind them, and there's also a certain level of intellect that is required that can lend itself then to explaining plans to architects, surveyors, planners and builders. All of these services cost a lot of money. It's seemingly impossible to reach a goal of having your own home without following this set process. This is another example of how social inequality is actually embedded into our system. The notion of a self-build is in itself a middle-class ideal, not accessible to all. While I was in Boston, I met with David, who's from a startup called Placeful. They are fresh out of the MIT Design School, and they are looking at how technology can help people who would like to pursue the self-build option. Their platform is developed so that an individual can check out all the land that is available in their locality. They can not only view who owns the land, but how long the land has been empty. They can also digitally construct their visions of their own home on that plot. The platform uses live data to instruct the user on what they can legally build on that plot, and even suggests how they can get around planning and zoning laws by combining their build perhaps with another person with the same idea. The database is still being developed, but eventually a user could build up enough of a case to put in an application to build without having to spend any money on the expert opinion that is normally required to do so. At the moment, Placeful are seeking funding to help them develop their platform, and understandably it has been slightly difficult, given that if their platform was successful, it would entirely wipe out certain professions such as architects and quantity surveyors. Luckily for us here in the UK, we also have our own startup locally who are working on this particular problem. DemoDev are based in Birmingham, and they are working alongside the Land Registry, the Ordnance Survey and Birmingham City Council to help individuals to unlock underused land without having prior knowledge or money. I'd also like to mention an unbelievably exciting project that is happening pretty much under our noses in London called Open Systems Lab. Open Systems Lab have developed an open source design platform that allows individuals to construct a house of their dreams on a screen, whilst also calculating right down to the last screw how much this build would cost. This project has been constructed with the help of multiple coders throughout the world and has been kept open source so that the service will be free at all times to a service user. So not only can you design your home on Open Systems Lab, you can actually create a file which can be sent to a CNC machine in a local factory, and you can watch as the home of your dreams is then literally printed part for part. I would strongly recommend that we give more support to ventures such as this, and I would call upon organisations here in Northern Ireland to help to create more accelerators for ventures that are focusing particularly on housing. Lastly, on this point, I would like to point out that people are also forms of technology, and their skills and expertise can be applied to projects in new ways. Whilst I was in Portland, I worked alongside the Centre for Public Interest Design, who were part of Portland State University. Their aim was to democratise design by offering traditionally expensive design services to those who were in most need, in particular those who were in need of affordable housing. Last year, the students provided bespoke housing solutions for a homeless women's community, and this year I was able to watch their presentations of work for a village of formerly homeless veterans. Their work was really highly researched. Some of them were looking into considerations around post-traumatic stress, while other students were looking into housing that would allow veterans to sleep under the stars. A student gains thousands of times more experience from working directly on a housing solution as opposed to taking an internship in a large design or architecture company. I would like to call on our institutions to further build on projects like this and allowing students to put their skills and expertise and young minds onto our housing crisis here. Lastly, I would like to look at the power of policy. So traditionally, our land and housing projects are controlled by our local housing authorities. At the beginning of this project, I found that information really intimidating and confusing. While in our sister city of Boston in the autumn of 2017, I was lucky enough to spend some time in the Mayor's office. Mayor Marty Walsh has been in office since 2014 and has made some really important and visionary changes to the department structure. Boston is currently the fourth most expensive city in the USA to live in, and there are over 700 people moving to the greater Boston area every day. Its population of 650,000 people is growing at a rapid rate. The most impressive part of this, to me, was the implementation of a Housing Innovation Lab which lived within the City Council. The Housing Innovation Lab fed on issues that were provided by other departments, such as the Department for Environment, or they even have a Department for Retirement in the City of Boston. The Housing Innovation Lab was one of the most impressive things that I saw on my entire trip, and I have brought a lot of ideas and inspiration back from there. This is the team at the lab. They come from all walks of life. Just one of them is a city planner, another has a degree in law. Marcy, here in the centre, is the director. She is an ex-teacher. They host students from all over the city who are studying anything from sociology to environmental studies. I felt this cross-disciplinary approach was extremely important in being able to look at housing issues from multiple angles. Most of the work they have done is done in tandem with the public, so they bring in public engagement specialists who are then employed to host engaging workshops so that they can have meaningful and creative interactions with the public, looking at all of the housing issues that Boston faces. The Housing Innovation Lab are very specific in their approach, so they are looking at housing issues as they present themselves in Boston, and they are looking specifically at how those housing issues affect Bostonians. So that particular approach of being very specific about a city and the culture that that city holds, I felt was really, really important in the work that they are carrying out. The work that they were creating really met the needs of the city and was culturally appropriate for its people. As you can see, they balance multiple projects at once. These are just a few of such that I saw while I was there, one being a pilot that brought widowed seniors together with young students in a home share where both could have mutual benefit. I love how they've adopted the lean startup approach to working with housing projects. Each piece of work begins with a housing concern or idea that might be raised by the public, or it has been highlighted by another department within the council. This is then explored by the team, who try to build a body of statistical evidence, and they then begin to hold workshops with the public to see if they can justify a short-term experiment to further explore that idea. They then construct a low-cost short-term pilot with small numbers of people to then see in practice whether that idea could come to fruition within the city. These experiments tend to last anything from a few weeks to 1 year. Once an experiment has been completed, it's evaluated quickly, and an iteration of the work might be proposed, or evidence might be gathered to see if they could roll this out as a larger initiative for the city. An example of a project that I saw while I was there was the intergenerational home share pilot. This combined 6 homeowners who were either retired or widowed with 6 students who were moving to the city and were seeking low-cost accommodation. These people lived together for a year, and while I was there, the initial results were being assessed. Things were looking really positive. I also saw structural interventions that the Innovation Lab were working on, this one being about the ADUs. So ADUs are additional dwelling units. The City of Boston really wanted to encourage homeowners to separate their dwellings into individual dwellings where possible, so that they could fulfil the need for single-person homes in the city. They wanted this to be done in a safe and legal way, and hoping that these people then were not going to buy into expensive business models such as Airbnb. Traditionally, the city would have made this quite difficult for the homeowners. Through the Housing Innovation Lab working on it, they were then able to actually support these people through finance and guides to allow them to make this process as safe and painless as possible. So the Housing Innovation Lab devised various strategies to help these homeowners, as well as the financial side of things. So they had a toolkit that homeowners then could look at to enable them to establish for themselves what would be legal and affordable for them to inevitably help the city to house more and more of the single individuals that they had. I was also able to witness the real policy change that happened as a result of that work. So here we have Marcy, the head of the Innovation Lab, who's pitching her idea and the work that they've done so far and their findings to the board of their council. She also brought along support from several other departments. So it was really exciting to see how collaboration and experimentation could actually lead to real change within a city like Boston. Here you can see some of the guiding values of the lab, that they were people-focused and design-centred. So this was really part of the ethos that I would like to bring back here to Belfast when thinking about a lab such as this. There has been a brilliant development since looking at this presentation, which is that we have recently received funding as the holding project to bring about a housing lab to Belfast. It will be called the East Belfast Housing Lab, and we will be working in collaboration with Eastside Partnership to bring some of these approaches and ideas to Belfast. Now for my final recommendations on the physical side of housing. I feel we should really embrace new housing typologies, whether these be modular or looking at how we can use underused space within the city. I feel that we should be using technology to try to democratise the housing situation here. So again, making sure that it's in the right people's hands so that it can be actually an agent of social change. I really feel that we should support housing experimentation, such as I've described that I saw at the Housing Innovation Lab. So I really hope that we can gain support for our East Belfast Housing Lab here to carry out short-term, low-cost housing pilots to establish the ideas and initiatives that would work for us here in Belfast. That brings me to the end of my talk on housing for human growth. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this, and I really hope that this presentation has given you some ideas and inspiration. If you'd like to discuss any of the findings that I presented here, please get in touch with me using the contact details at the end of the presentation. Also, if you'd like to view the written appendix that accompanies this presentation, please get in touch. I'd like to thank everybody that has helped me with this project, most of all the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, who were able to support me in allowing me to travel to learn and return to inspire. I'd also like to thank the Prince's Trust for being a really accommodating employer throughout this time. Then there are also multiple other people that you can see here that I'd like to thank in helping me to come up with a project that has really inspired me to create change in the housing situation here in Belfast.